At my husband's funeral, my son hung my photo at the entrance with the caption, "No entry," but he didn't realize. I stood on the steps of the small funeral chapel, the Arizona sun beating down on the polished wood door, where my own face watched me from a framed photograph hung next to the sign that screamed, "No entry," in bold black letters. My son Brandon's voice echoed inside my mind. She steps inside. She walks through that doorway. I will call the police immediately. The words sliced into me like a blade, but I did not flinch. I still held my back straight, though I felt smaller than a sparrow. I carried with both hands a simple bouquet of white carnations my neighbor had given me. She still believed I needed beauty in that moment. They weighed heavy in my arms. Behind me, the gravel crunched as relatives whispered and laughed behind folded hands. That old lady once canceled her daughter-in-law's nail appointment because she said it was a waste of money, someone snorted. Of course she would sabotage family joy, another woman whispered with a smirk. Every word, every glance told me I had already been exiled twice over. First by fortune, now by family. I glanced up at the chapel entrance. The wreaths and wreath stands that lined the walkway were arranged by family members who acted as if they had never loved me. My son had insisted on blue ribbons and glass-etched sympathy cards he paid with the inheritance he could recite in dollar signs as if memorized scripture. He looked at me the other day and said, "Mom, I want to keep your part of the money separate. It is not for you. It is for a souvenir." I swallowed hard. I'd left whatever vanity I still had upstairs by the cracked window where the breeze carried dust through the lace curtain. Now all I carried was that bouquet and my memories of a man who had once kissed me as though I saved him by breathing. I raised my head and touched the side of the chapel doorway, secondhand wood sending a tremor through my fingertips. I remembered when I had helped choose that chapel for its quiet dignity, when all those years ago he was alive, strong, humming old folk songs, asking me to wait in the passenger seat while he parked the car. He always found a place for me. Now even the stones pushed me out. A distant aunt turned and clasped her hands around her pearl necklace, like she had caught me trespassing. A cousin huffed, "Do you think she even knows what she is doing here?" I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the desert air, dry, harsh, honest. I remembered his belt buckle, polished to a shine, how he said, "Those who wear medals did not win blood, it was the others who paid for us." Then the cough came. He survived, but barely. I sold his Purple Heart because he needed an ambulance. We needed medicine. I couldn't live with the guilt of watching him die without trying. So yes, I sold his medal, but not for vanity or for myself. I sold it because my heart could not bear his disappearance. Yet they said I did it for myself. They said I did it for comfort. They said I was selfish. They said I was worthless. A distant relative shouted from inside, "Who let the intruder in? That woman belongs on a bench at the diner, not at a funeral." My heart twisted, but I did not step back. The flowers in my hands trembled, petals ready to fall. I thought, maybe I should run, melt into the Arizona heat, become nothing. But then I heard a steady footstep behind me. I turned to see an older man in a worn military uniform, the man from my husband's platoon. We fought side by side decades ago, when I was still Michelle, the young wife waiting with letters and patched clothes. At his chest was the ribbon of the same Purple Heart I had sold. In his hands was a polished wooden box. He stepped forward and said quietly, "Michelle, he would want this returned to you." He placed the box on a small folding chair set in the shade of a mesquite branch. I stared at it. Inside was the medal, the Purple Heart I sold, and on the inside of the lid was a letter in my husband's shaky handwriting. "Michelle, you are the real medal. Without you, I never survived. This is yours always and beyond." My breath hitched. I stared at the words, read and reread until the parking lot dust settled over my vision. Inside the chapel was beginning the somber notes of the funeral service. I could faintly hear the minister say, "We gather to honor the life of a beloved husband, a veteran, and a father." And there I was, standing outside, holding his words, his truth, and his greatest honor, returned not in a court document, not in my son's arrogance, but by a comrade who remembered. My tears were steady, not for myself, but for the injustice of being judged when I had only tried to save the man I loved. I stepped forward now, unlocked by that truth, from the scorching steps into the chapel. The "no entry" sign looked small, ridiculous. I slipped past it, silent but invincible. The door closed behind me, not with shame, but with recognition that this place was always mine. I remember the day he told me he had been seeing someone else. We were sitting in the living room, where the pale light filtered through lace curtains and dust settled like memory. I had been folding Brandon's laundry, his first pair of khakis that he had worn to kindergarten, full of grass stains and crayon scribbles. He came in and sat across from me, eyes tired, and said, "I did not mean for it to happen, Michelle, but I have been seeing her." My hands slowed, the warmth drained out of me, and I felt as though a lock clicked shut inside my chest. The words themselves would not kill me, but the realization that I was not enough to keep him from walking away with someone else bruised me deeper than any blow could. Yet when Brandon's baby face peeked around the corner, calling for Daddy, I forced my shoulders to stand straight and smiled. I stayed because Brandon needed a father in his life, and I could not bear to be the cause of his father fleeing entirely. Night after night I lay awake, listening to the creak of the floor as he went out to meet her, the silence of our bedroom thicker than any fabric. I taught myself to breathe quietly so as not to wake the child who believed in love but had seen too much of it crumble. I told myself, I stay so he has a father. I stay so that the house feels whole when Brandon walks through the door. I stay because even a broken family is better than none. Then came the heart attack. I found him on the kitchen floor next to the coffee pot, hand bleeding, his face ashen. I called an ambulance with trembling hands and held his head in my lap in the hospital where the white walls hummed with antiseptic regret. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, that the stroke nearly cost him his life. The bills piled up faster than the tears I did not cry in front of Brandon. I had a savings account, just a small one. Brandon's college fund was just small and raw in my purse, and I could not ruin his future for his father's illness. I sold the Purple Heart he had received overseas, mounted in a small case, after the doctors said he might not survive. I told myself I was doing it so the man who once held me in his arms would continue to breathe. I was saving the person I had once loved so deeply that forgetting him was not an option. I watched from the hospital corridor as paramedics wheeled him away, telling me they would do everything they could, and I thought, I sold his medal not because I no longer valued it, but because it meant less than his next heartbeat. When I brought home enough money to cover the costs, I returned from the pawn shop with a letter instead of the medal. They had sold it to a collector who did not want to return it. I cried in the bedroom, pressed the letter between my hands. "We are sorry, cannot return, spent." Even that apology cut me. I tucked it away in a drawer. I told the doctor's office I would cover what remained when I could, and I said a silent prayer that the compassion I gave when I stayed would be returned to me someday. Brandon grew into a young man with sharp eyes and sharper words. He blamed me for everything. "If you had left, Dad would have met someone better," he said once, when he was 15 and found his textbooks overdue. He accused me of keeping him in emotional debt, of making him choose between a family reputation and the truth. "You chose loyalty so you could feel like a martyr," he snarled. I nodded and let him go. I stayed because that child still needed me to hold him through the storms of adolescence. I remember him telling his friends about me, how I was the woman who canceled his coupons because I was stingy, how I would declutter his childhood with labeled boxes and budgets and lessons in thrift. They laughed, thinking I was a villain in a tale of domestic disdain. When I visited his college dorm to drop off bread and peanut butter during finals week, he texted me the next day. "Stop sending me food. I do not need a mother. I have friends." I stopped sending food, but I cried when I heard his roommate say, "You are lucky your mom cares." Some of us eat ramen every night. Every memory burned me. The prom night I drove him so he would not be stranded, the awards ceremony where he glowed and I clapped louder than anyone else, the science fair when my camera jammed and I still managed to catch that photo of him standing proud beside his volcano model. I taped that photo to the fridge, its tape curling with time, even after he moved out and college bills consumed the rest of my living expenses. Years later, After the funeral, people in the neighborhood told me how they saw him signing papers, how he looked over his shoulder before leaving the house I had once called our home. He was living with his girlfriend now, the same one he told me about so many years ago. They had been seen choosing paint colors for a nursery. I felt nothing. I remembered the night he was born, quiet and perfect, and the day he flew away, bursting with ambition, and I whispered to the night sky, "I did this so you would fly, not so you would cut ties." In the end, I was the woman who carried 2 broken hearts in her arms, his originally, then mine. I sold the metal, not for comfort, but because sometimes love demands giving away the symbols of sacrifice for the sake of another life. I stayed not because I had to, but because loyalty is sometimes the loneliest place of all. I arrived at the chapel doors, clutching my coat tightly around me as though it were a fragile shield, the air inside heavy with mirrored chandeliers and muffled voices. As I stepped forward, a uniformed attendant blocked the entrance without a word. His stern face softened only momentarily. When he saw my trembling hands holding that small bouquet, I opened my mouth to say something gentle, something about my husband, but the words were snatched away by the collapsing hush around me. Brandon emerged from behind the closed doors, his posture rigid, eyes burning with contempt. He spoke into the silence like a prosecutor. She sold Dad's Purple Heart just to buy anti-anxiety medication for herself. The words spread through the chapel like spilled ink, staining the air in ways I could no longer ignore. I felt a swirl of motion behind me. Recognizable faces blurred. Friends of my husband, cousins whose names I could once recite, neighbors who had once offered casseroles, rising from their chairs. They exchanged glances before filing past me toward the front pews. I stood still, their movement like a wave of indifference crashing across the chapel floor. One of my husband's old fishing buddies tapped Brandon lightly on the shoulder and whispered. I heard, though I did not see. She did it to save him. We know. But no one intervened, and no apology rose in the air. I swallowed slowly, tasting the bitterness of being erased in front of people who once fed my pride. Update. I took another breath and saw my husband's fishing partner step closer to the attendant, leaning down with a quiet urgency. The man's face clouded with something like regret. I knitted my fingers tighter around the flowers. I had not come here for forgiveness, but to stand witness to truth, not lies. My legs folded into themselves when I noticed Dylan, my neighbor, showing the security guard a few wrinkled bills, enough to pay for the coffin and more. Then the guard simply stepped aside. The shift was slight, but to me it broke chains. Brandon's voice was gone. The room paused around its echo. I inhaled and walked forward, each step a thunderous drum, but toward the threshold of entry. Once inside, the chapel felt small, suffocating, and all the forged respect I once earned seemed to evaporate. I could see the collar of the pastor's robe, the stained glass reflections on the casket, and I thought, is this where I belong? I had carried his dreams across decades, and the honor of those years was evaporating under the accusation that I had sold a symbol of valor for pills. Then Brandon stood at the front with his wife, her eyes filled with performance, not grief. He cleared his throat and added for effect, "Feel free to take a seat, but outside." The room stiffened, the guests in the back rearranged, shifting into solid bodies between me and the front pews. I felt my bones fold into calm. I did not speak. I only placed the carnation bouquet on a small table, next to a framed photo of my husband, smiling, alive, before illness stole him. A sob escaped my throat. Not mine. The pastor cleared his throat. Let us pray. The candles trembled. I bowed my head and let the silence fill me. Outside the chapel, someone murmured, "What a disgrace." I thought, disgrace is defined by own hearts. I did not leave during the prayer. I stayed until it ended, when the air cracked with soft hallelujahs and the mourners stepped forward. Some patted me on the shoulder, others did not make eye contact. I rose, shoulders square. I carried that stillness out with me like a banner. Outside the chapel, the sun was harsh again. The pavement glowed. Brandon's hand slipped from his wife's grip, and he leaned over to whisper, "She does not deserve anything." His voice echoed in the sunlit dale. I exhaled, long and slow. It did not sting, it cleansed. I turned away from him, from the chapel, from the eyes that had judged me. I walked to the edge of the parking lot where my car waited and placed a hand on its cool hood. I looked once more at the chapel door, at the faces inside, and then turned. I left them behind. I stood just outside the chapel doors, palms pressed against the painted white frame as though I could feel every sorrow etched onto the surface. I thought I had no right to be here. I had sold his Purple Heart, sold it to pay for the ambulance, to keep my husband alive when a stroke nearly claimed him. But right then, when I had steeled myself to bow out of their presence, I saw him appear. Raymond Ellis, his army jacket still covered in stripes and pins, and a small wooden box carefully cupped in both weathered hands. He moved like a soldier whose mission had finally ended, not with death, but with an act of honor restored. I heard no applause, the world waiting with bated breath as he approached. When he reached me, I swallowed the bitter ache of shame and lifted my eyes. He did not pretend he did not know what I had done. He said, softly, "Michelle, you sold his medal to save his breath. I knew how much he meant to you. I just want you to have it again." He placed the box on the ground. My breath caught when I saw the brass corner inlay, the grain of the wood polished to a glow. He opened it, and there, nestled between royal blue satin, lay the Purple Heart, tarnished at the edges, but still glinting with past courage. Beside it was a folded piece of lined paper, neatly written in a shaky hand. I picked it up with trembling fingers, already knowing what it said. "Michelle," I whispered, voice small. "How?" He stood back, rigid, tears in his eyes. "He wanted you to have it. He always thought you deserved it more than he ever did." I unfolded the letter, and in my friend's voice I heard my husband's echo. "Michelle, you are my true medal. In war I shot at enemies, but my greatest battle was living without your support. You are not less than me. Give your heart to the world. It is stronger than mine ever was." I pressed the letter to my chest, my body folding into the weight of love, sacrifice, regret, and redemption. A car backfired. The canvas of the world shivered at that moment, as if something ancient and true had roared back to life. Inside, I could hear Brandon cough. I turned and looked at him, his face ashen, eyes red with midnight tiredness. No one else was watching. They had all scattered when Raymond entered, too stunned to remain curious. I knelt, gathering the Purple Heart and the letter together. They felt heavy and holy in my lap. "Put the bouquet down," Raymond said gently. I did, and he took my arm and led me inside. The guard parted like a sea for someone important, not because of politics, but because of character, regained. We walked through the chapel hush. The minister paused mid-prayer, his eyes following us. I thought I would cry, but every drop of tears had already fallen where they needed to, inside the box, inside my heart, beside my husband's name on that paper. Raymond whispered over my shoulder. "He asked me to bring it back here if you ever needed it." I walked to the front, the aisle thick with the smell of lilies and cedar, and placed the box on the same table where the flowers stood. The photograph of my husband looked almost triumphant by comparison, not because the military had honored him again, but because the woman he loved had found closure for him and for herself. When Brandon stood when he saw me walk in, confusion flashed across his face like lightning. He wanted to say something, but I raised a hand. I did not need to speak. The medal spoke. The letter spoke. Every person there knew he had tried to erase me, but now everything had turned. Raymond took his seat. I knelt in front of the box and read the letter out loud in a voice only they could hear. "You are my true medal." And I meant it more than words can ever carry. Then I turned toward Brandon and held the medal in both hands. His shoulders fell, as if he carried them for the longest time and finally let go. No one applauded. Some exhaled, but then people began to come forward. Cousins, neighbors, even a few friends of Brandon, who remembered how I once baked cookies after broken bones, sat in waiting rooms after car crashes, listened when nobody else did. One by one, they bowed their heads or offered their hands, not to honor me for what I had done, but for what I had not stopped doing. For love stronger than shame, for sacrifice greater than resentment, for loyalty that never died. I held the medal pressed against my heart, even after everyone had gone silent again. I thought, this is how forgiveness begins, not with forgetting, but with proof of love restored. That evening, as I stepped outside, the sky had turned amber. The air smelled of rain and dust, the desert holding on to the day's heat. Raymond walked beside me, and I asked quietly, "Will you walk me home?" He nodded, and we walked in companionable silence through the chapel grounds, where magnolia petals lay like notes of memory. Brandon sat in his car watching as we passed. I did not see anger in his eyes anymore. I saw loss. I saw regret. But most of all, I saw the truth, that love survives when courage finds its voice. Then I looked at the medal in my hand. It was not the end of anything. It was beginning again. __, I stepped. Through the chapel doors into a world I barely recognized. Bright lights, solemn rows of seated faces, flashes of cameras, and a hush like drawn curtains. The room smelled of lilies and wood polish, of mourning mixed with something sharper. Anticipation. Brandon stood at the front, next to the coffin that bore his father's folded flag. He held a remote device, thumb hovering over it, with a look that said he was about to break open the final chapter of our lives. My heart hammered as he pressed play. The screen behind the pastor flickered and came alive with a video. My husband, pale and weak, clutching the same medal I returned and holding a letter in his trembling hand. His voice came softly, full of both resolve and sorrow. "Michelle, you were my strength when my body failed. I am leaving everything I own to the only person who never gave up on me. Michelle, this house, our savings, every share, all belongs to her. Brandon will receive $1, and only $1. If he ever kneels and publicly apologizes to Michelle, kneels and asks for forgiveness in front of our family and those who care, then I will consider allowing him a modest share. But until that moment, Michelle is the one who will carry forward our legacy." The room erupted. I felt the box containing the medal drop from my hands, metal clinking against wood and satin, but I did not bend to pick it up. Brandon froze, his face draining. Reporters raised cameras. The clicks and whispers surged, like waves crashing at the edges of grief and justice. I stood small over the box, feeling its weight against the swell of truth. Brandon's knees collapsed into wood. A single sunflower, crushed and forgotten, lay on the chapel floor, my silent message of forgiveness in petals. In that moment, as Brandon knelt, I understood that what we dismiss as broken can hold the most dignity. He plopped down on his own suit jacket, head hitting the pew, hands braced on the seat before him. Someone gasped, "He's kneeling to his mother." A hush followed as the words echoed. No one expected public admission. The condition was not buried in fine print. They said they signed for love, not legal battles, but love, it seemed, could still demand accountability. Brandon murmured through tears, I never meant." His voice cracked so hard even his fiancée turned away. I stood there, immobile, watching the man who called me parasite, who hung no entry above my face, kneel at my feet as if nothing had sunk him lower than denying me. Not humiliated, that word is not enough. He was broken. But I did not gloat. I simply watched, because grief does not need name-calling to be effective. Outside, social media erupted. Phones everywhere streamed the moment live. Feed after feed carried headlines like, "Son who banned mother from funeral now kneels before her in tears." Comments poured in. "Karma's a desert wind. Memories but no mercy backfires. Justice wears lilies." Even news anchors replayed the moment with complete silence, letting images do the talking. Ministers cleared their throats. Meek hands passed tissues to him. I felt a weird relief, the kind that blooms when truth finally moves. I looked down at Caleb, that toddler from the photo just days ago. He stared at Brandon, eyebrows knitted, confusion creasing his forehead, as if watching someone unravel too fast to catch. I bent to scoop up the medal and the letter. Brandon lifted his head when I passed by and caught the note. "Michelle is stronger than my mistakes." I paused and our eyes met. He flinched as if ashamed to see what he had denied. Outside, cameras followed me. Reporters called my name like a benediction. I didn't run. I walked, chest lifted, measured steps. Every eye met mine, not with judgment, but with the kind of recognition that cannot be earned with excuses. In the afternoon sun, I slipped on my coat and slipped outside, past the crowd that had once turned their backs, past Brandon, who watched me go. The door closed.